Last night I hit 50k subscribers, and a lot of you may know me for my shorts and my EDH content and maybe some Magic stories, but I am a mill player first and foremost, and I wanted to use that to celebrate a return to form. First of all, leave a like on the video if you've been here for a while, maybe if you've been here since the beginning, but regardless, we're halfway to one of them YouTube play buttons, but we are still in the midst of a crisis for a modern mill in the current modern metagame. But that doesn't mean we don't have game, and I wanted to spend this video going over how modern mill has tools for the rest of the metagame, how modern mill can actually tackle the top of the metagame. And yes, of course, if you find your sideboard card, you get there, but that doesn't mean that the deck can't compete when it comes to how it's constructed and how it's played. And I'm going to be spending a lot of time in the next coming weeks going over a key deck list that I think a lot of people have been avoiding. So join me in this journey, maybe taking the curtain back a little bit on what modern mill is, where it's been, and maybe give you a look at how this archetype is one of the best out there, simply because a lot of its pilots know the secret is it can't really be good in the public eye, or else everyone's going to hate it out. Now, firstly, this is a list from Demonic Tutors, 13th place, 5-2 in a recent modern challenge. I'm specifically highlighting Demonic Tutors just as a fellow content creator, but you have Tyoshi and everything here, 14th place with it, 2 modern challenges back to back, and Tybalt of the Red Sub. It's a 1-for-1 list. Tybalt of the Red Sub is the best mill player out there. He may not be joining big tournaments regularly, but if you go to his profile, all he plays is mill. He 5-0s constantly. He's always up there in the challenge. He's won, I'm pretty sure, 3 or 4 modern challenges at this point this year. I'm 90% sure it's at least 2, 80% sure it's like 4 this year. My man is like actually really good at mill. He's really good at his matchups. He practices them. And the key to his sideboarding that a lot of people can't wrap their head around is the fact that he is probably the only top level player in modern that is sideboarding to 60 plus cards. His sideboard technique for years, even before I started, has been put 2 Ghost Quarters in and add cards. Because a lot of cards in the deck are good. You struggle with removing critical mass of mill spells sometimes, and you just can't find them. So why remove those good cards when you can just add some lands for consistency, add lands that honestly kind of work with your game plan and are really good in terms of thinning out your opponent's deck and punishing good lands in this metagame in a world full of Eldrazi. But Ghost Quarters can enable your archive traps if your opponent chooses to search. But of course, with that, you can just add more cards. And consistently, you will see on Tybalt's channel, there is a language barrier, which is what's kind of prevented a lot of people from mass adopting. But those on the Mill Discord have done so already by watching his videos and creating sideboard guides based on how he sideboards, and sees that Ghost Quarter is constantly going to be a card that allows him to go usually 64, sometimes 65, just usually over 60 cards post board, keeping a lot of the main board, bringing in that removal, just taking out some of the fluff and just playing the damn game. And so this is how modern mill can excel. One of the reasons why it has been doing so well, maybe not in the North American sphere where you get a lot of news around Magic, but internationally through Tybalt, he's using methods that aren't really of that grain, as we might say. It's not cut by the right path here, and really it's something that brings something so unique to an archetype that not a lot of people pay attention to. They think they can just put an Emrakul, a shuffle effect in the sideboard and win, but with recent additions you even get beat, like a way to beat that in consigned memory. Now traditionally a lot of decks have just been playing Soul Guide Lantern, sometimes Nihil Spell Bombs, going up on extirpates in the sideboard, because modern mill traditionally has been really good against graveyard decks because we have to be ready for them. Naturally, feeding a graveyard, you have to be able to be ready to answer to it. But consigned memory has been really interesting because for some people, not for Tybalt, because Tybalt, my man's crazy, largely chooses to ignore it. Decides, a lot of people decide to play consigned memory instead of graveyard hate, because a lot of times that graveyard hate can just be countered with consigned memory. So if your Emrakul has a trigger, counter it with consign. If the Solitude, or not the Solitude, the Endurance has a trigger, counter it with the consign. And so a lot of these effects that you care about can generally be countered with consign, and you can replicate it so you can kind of quote unquote make it uncounterable. You can cast multiple copies of it and your opponent can't deal with all of them. Flusterstorm has been a largely unplayable Magic card in modern, in a world where Force of Will doesn't exist like Legacy, where you actually have really interesting like instant battles like back and forth on the stack. Consigned Memory has a really interesting place in Modern because it's able to counter the Storm trigger, the Cascade trigger. It's able to counter, again, random triggers, ETBs and whatnot that shuffle away stuff and also hit all of the colorless effects that exist. So although Tibalt and Demonic Shooters may not be playing this, Consigned Memory is a really powerful Magic card that actually added a lot to the Modern mill game plan. And just because you aren't, as a mill player, shuffling in your deck to be 60 plus cards post board, you can still succeed without the Ghost Quarters plan. There's still plenty of people 5-0ing and doing well in challenges without that type of plan, playing Consigned Memory, playing other options, and just showcasing how the list does have a lot of work to do when it comes to showing people that it has the staying power. Now, when it comes to the Modern metagame, I want to go over the top 5 deck lists as of the past 30 days. There's Is It Prowess, Eldrazi Ramp, Boros Energy, Murktide, and Ruby Storm. All of these decks are at a varying level of good matchup, quote unquote, for mill. And in the large grand scheme of things, let's be honest here, let's call a spade a spade. Modern mill is not good for this world in terms of its matchups. It's not doing a good job, or it's not doing good against the top of the metagame. Boros Energy is a bad matchup for it. Eldrazi Ramp, probably a bad matchup, closer to 50-50, but definitely on the lower side. Is It Prowess, 100% a bad matchup. Dimir Murktide, really, actually, Dimir Murktide is the worst matchup out of all of these. At least the other ones, like Eldrazi Ram, sometimes if you feel to ruin them, you can get away with it. If you have removal in the right spots against Is It Prowess and Boros Energy, heck, if you Crypt Incursion Boros Energy, you can get there. But Dimir Murktide, at the end of the day, the mid-range strategies are always better than mill, because mill is a mid-range strategy. It's not a burn strategy. It's never been, and it hasn't been for a really long time. People need to stop considering it Dimir burn, blue burn. That's not what it is. You have to play the control game. You have to play things slower. And the mid-range decks will always do that better than you, because you are trying to 1-for-1 your opponent. You're trying to create weird avenues and angles and weird play patterns to create value. And the mid-range decks will always do that better than you. They will always 1-for-1 better, because they're playing at axes that matter. You are working with people's decks, whereas they're working with your hand, battlefield, and their life total. So you're just, again, working on axes that don't really matter as much. Dimir Murktide will always be better. It's 1-for-1 ability. It spell pierces. The fact that Orcish Bowmasters counters your Visions of Beyond. You have Psychic Frog, which is an insane level threat that answers your primary threat answer in terms of Drown in the Lock. It's just going to be really, really bad for you. And even Ruby Storm, I would say favored, but actually really close, because Ruby Storm tends to actually have a lot of alt angles. Unlike the Is It Storm deck, where you can get away with just like fatal pushing the 2-drop, or just countering the first spell and giving yourself an extra turn, then fatal, giving yourself more time to find your answers. Ruby Storm can just get the Ruby Storm can win on turn 2. There are worlds where you play, you go 2 mana, play Ritual, play your Ruby Medallion, and then use that 1 mana to start going off from there. It happens. And so Ruby Storm has alternative plans. It has mid-range plans. It has different ways to win the game through the interaction that you have. So it's not just about graveyard hate, although a will play Surgical, a will play Extirpate can generally get you there. So let's go into the matchup specifically. Firstly, I want to talk about Is It Prowess. Latest on to the show here, Quarry Steel Cutter is a card that works against how Mill wants to tackle this deck. Only 12 creatures. Mill is looking to cast Crypt Incursion against this deck. The problem is that's not going to be the best way to tackle it at only 12 creatures with Lightning Bolts and Lava Darts. The hardest thing that this deck has to deal with, honestly, it will have the removal. The hardest thing this deck has to deal with is Lava Dart. And now it's going to be store Quarry Steel Cutter, because it's a threat generator that you don't get value from necessarily fatal pushing, because your Crypt Incursion value doesn't grow, and we're not playing Prismatic Ending. So something like the Lava Darts is actually really problematic, because it's a free source of damage that's out of the graveyard that you generally are going to be feeding it. And I used to like going the hard control route. Like when Prowess was really good, I used to play like 3 Ashiok Dreamrenders in the sideboard. You used to be able to stop the Amulet Titan decks with that. Like the minute you resolve Ashiok Dreamrender, the Amulet Titan deck just poops. It sucks. But then also it's able to mill and also get rid of Lava Darts, get rid of maybe any Delirium shenanigans, any graveyard shenanigans that are going on. And so you get a lot of value out of something like that. Heck, even Violent Urge that has Delirium in it. Sometimes you would play Dragon's Rage Channelers in these type of decks, but Violent Urge having the Delirium, stopping that is really important. But regardless, the one card that you're looking for that's going to beat this deck is going to be Tasha's Hideous Laughter. I mean, look at the average converted mana cost of this deck. You have 17 lands, 4/0 mana, a bunch of 1s. Tasha's Hideous Laughter is going to be like 3 mana, at least mill 20-25 cards, which is really, really good value. A lot of pressure. You think about them drawing 7 cards plus 3. So by the time it hits turn 3, they've drawn some amount of cards, probably fetched 1 or 2. They maybe Mishra's bobbled once. So they're down to about like 47 cards. You toss this for 25. All of a sudden they're at 22 and they're at the range of all of a sudden losing to a crab plus fetch into a fractured sanity. And so it's actually a really reasonable line to be able to control the game, stabilize to that point, Tasha's Hideous Laughter, and get there. In the post board, you're having to worry about Spell Pierce and stuff like that, but Tasha's Hideous Laughter is your like must resolve. This is the card that if you have to play, unless you have multiple copies, you are looking to play around something like a Spell Pierce, and you probably, unless you have to, you don't really want to cast a Fractured Sandy. Again, feeding into Delirium, feeding into the Lava Darts can be a problematic thing based on how many cards they have in their hand and what is on the battlefield. But Tasha's Hideous Laughter is your tool against something like that deck. Next up, I want to talk about Energy, the big bad of the format. Again, there isn't a particularly bad thing about this deck. It's just all in all, it's good. The Guide of Souls just giving them like a crazy amount of values. If you had to point at something, I would actually argue that it is probably Phage is a close second. I wouldn't like, this isn't too bad. By the time they hit turn 4, if you're not close to turning the corner and winning the game, Phage just seals it, but Phage doesn't necessarily stabilize all too much. Generally, Phage doesn't come in with haste all too much. It does happen. You have to be aware of the Arena Glories. They have 3 copies of it. It does happen. But regardless, you are feeding their graveyard. I would say a Johnny tends to be the card that seals it out. A Johnny is the card that generally does enough damage to you to put you to the point where something like Phage is lethal against you, is that problematic card against you. And so that is the card that I would probably point to. Goblin Bombardment being that close. Goblin Bombardment being the seal of the deal. Honestly, if they go turn 1 Guide of Souls, turn 2 Goblin Bombardment, I'd be really scared. You could probably Fatal Push the Guide, but that enchantment now you are not interacting with. You are not going to Otawara the Goblin Bombardment. That is not going to happen on turn 4. You are racing at that point. You should be panicked. So Goblin Bombardment is close. If they play the Goblin Bombardment, just pray they don't have a Johnny. If they have a Johnny, you lost. You lost. They have too much value. They now have a grip of 4 cards left. They got the Johnny and the Goblin Bombardment. You lost. You lost that game. You are therefore not getting there. Unless you triple archive trap them, it's not getting there. So generally speaking, if you're in that race mentality, what you want to be doing firstly is filling their graveyard and hitting them with the Crypt Incursion. Crypt Incursion is your best tool. It's the reason why I recommend a lot of modern mill decks right now go up to 3 copies across the 75. Usually at bare minimum 1 in the main board, if not 2. Regardless, 2 in the sideboard, 3 across the 75 is where you want to be, especially with Prowess near the top. You're going to need a lot more life gain than we usually do. Something that a lot of people have been talking about actually just on the Lolo is something like Esper Mill, because you have something like, I believe the card is Blossoming Calm with Rebound, where you can cast for 1 white, you gain 2 life and get hexproof, and then you rebound again, you gain 2 life again. So it's 4 life, but gaining the hexproof is kind of nice. Like gaining that protection is kind of nice because you dodge like lightning bolts and lava darts and all that stuff. So stuff like that can be really interesting. But when just sticking to Dimir, Crypt Incursion against Energy is going to be where you want to be. And you also have to rely on the fact that because Prowess is around, the Energy decks on average, like they have a really good matchup against Prowess, but they're going to tilt towards more interactions. Like Static Prisons are no longer going to be a 2 of, they're probably going to be a 3 of. You're always going to see a 4 of Galvanic Blast. You're just going to see more interaction on average. So you don't want to be playing out your crabs without some type of value. Unless you need it for a blocker, unless you need it for something, if you're not getting good value out of it, do not play out your crabs. They're going to get removed. Turn 1 crabs, generally speaking, isn't really a gameplay pattern that you have in this deck anymore. Removal is so good in a post Fatal Push era, in a post Galvanic, in a post Prismatic Ending, like whatever removal world, removal has become so efficient that turn 1 crab is no longer a play unless you have multiple crabs. If you have multiple crabs, 100% you play the crab out. Or you know the matchup. So if it's something like Amulet Titan, you're going to play out the crab and force them to have the Dismember. And so there's situations like that. Yes, you can get it out there. Or against Storm, you put out the crab just to like feed into their graveyard so you can have a surgical target like ASAP. There are situations where it happens, but against Energy, I can see a world where you force them to have the answer on turn 1, because if you have the crypt in hand and you want to force them to play out a removal spell instead of playing out something like a Guide of Souls, if they play out Guide of Souls and you're untapping with, you know, Crypt Incursion in hand, maybe a Glimpse, if you go fetch into Glimpse, that Crypt Incursion is fat. So you actually took a win there. So I want to point out that generally, if you know the matchup, if you're on the draw, you're not playing out Crab on 1. You probably aren't playing Crab on 1 even on the play, unless you got Crypt in hand. You might want to force them to have it. Meathook Massacre is the big sideboard tech of choice these days when it comes to answering this strategy. Meathook Massacre is really nice. A legendary enchantment. When it enters, creatures get -X/-X. Whenever a creature you control dies, an opponent loses 1 life. Not really relevant levels of text. The key is, whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 1 life. So what this does is stop the Goblin Bombardment wins. Now, in this slot, sometimes I'd play like Knight of Souls Betrayal as a permanent way to like stop the Ocelot Prides and its tokens and like just kill like random stuff. I think the like what's nice about Meathook Massacre, you get a one-time wipe, right? So generally you can pay the same amount as a Damnation, -X/-X, and it will kill all X2s, which is generally what you're looking for. It doesn't kill Phage, but whatever. But then if they're trying to go off with Goblin Bombardment, it'll undo that, because whenever they try and deal 1 damage to you, the creature dies, you gain 1 life. So they can still clear your board, but Meathook Massacre is the tech right now in the sideboard as a 1-of against Energy alongside Crypt Incursion. Next up is Gruul Eldrazi. Generally speaking, I think this is rather close, but probably unfavored, especially now with them trying out Ugin Eye of the Storms. It's a pretty big tap out. Ugin Eye of the Storms isn't actually that well melded for the Eldrazi decks. It's much better in Tron. Tron's not that good right now, especially if I should say Prowess is going to be really good. It's going to struggle. A lot of these decks have actually been shaving copies of Karn the Great Creator. If something like the Prowess decks are going to be really good, it's going to be really hard for a card like Karn the Great Creator to be relevant. So some of these decks have actually been going mid-range, especially if you kind of look across them. Yeah, like there are going to be decks that are playing Karn, but there are some versions playing like 2 to 3 copies, if not 0, and trying to opt for Ugin Eye of the Storms. Again, Ugin is better in Tron. When it comes to this matchup, you want to see them playing Ugin. Karn the Great Creator is problematic. Your biggest problem card is Emrakul the Promised End, a card that you enable to 6 mana. They're going to be able to cast this for the cheap. And yes, they control your turn. If you're expecting it, you want to make sure you create a turn in such a way where they can't really mess you up too much. Ruin Crabs are great because they can't point them in another direction. Hedron Crabs, they can point them at you. Remember that your opponent can fetch and choose not to find. Waste cards like that. Cards like Fractured Sanity are great. Tasha's is great. They might just tap you out. I don't know, whatever it is. You still got a turn after that. But Emrakul the Promised End is the big problem because it has protection from instants. Now, I would generally say you bring in Ensnaring Bridge against this deck if it wasn't for World Breaker. World Breaker is the most annoying thing because even if you destroy it, they can then bring it back, cast it again, exile target artifact. So generally, Ensnaring Bridge is actually so good into this matchup, especially when they're clearing your board with Kozilek's Return. You never creep your crabs. It's just really annoying when they use their World Breakers. So that is probably why I would opt not to bring in Ensnaring Bridges into this matchup. And I guess you could quote unquote force them to have it, but they're going to have it. You're going to mill it. It's going to go into their graveyard. They're going to bring it back. They're going to destroy your Ensnaring Bridge. They're going to go in for lethal. It's very problematic. Regardless, the card that generally you're looking for is Field of Ruin. Field of Ruin is going to get rid of those Eldrazi lands. Again, remembering that Eldrazi Temple doesn't tap for Ugin, right? So they need other ways to kind of get into that. Ugin's a very slow planeswalker for this deck, so don't even worry about that. Generally, the card that you're looking to stop is going to be Sowing Mycospawn. So if you're able to kind of beat that card, they don't have it. They didn't go like, they didn't go with the absolute nuts of Ugin's Labyrinth. So Ugin's Labyrinth on 1, they play something like a Talisman Impulse. Ugin's Labyrinth on 2, Sowing Mycospawn. That's absolutely insane in terms of the amount of mana that they have. But regardless, they can then kind of go into other cards. Like they have 3 mana left. They can, I don't know, play Talisman Impulse at that point, but they have their 3rd land. They've ramped out. So at that point, the card that you're looking for again is Field of Ruin to be able to just enable the archive traps, stop what they're searching. But Sowing Mycospawn kind of plays into what you're doing because against Eldrazi, you can generally just keep blank archive traps that you have no way to enable, because at some point they will search the library. At some point they will cast Sowing Mycospawn because it is a primary aspect to their plan to getting up to the mana that they need. So you'll be able to kind of enable that. But if you can punish them with Field of Ruin, that is going to be great. And that's why I wanted to also mention Archive Trap is a great way to punish this deck. Sometimes in some matchups, you're going to mold them away. For example, against something like Belcher, if you don't have the fields, if your hand doesn't have the fields, against Ruby Storm, you're probably going to mold them away. You're looking for other options, but against Eldrazi, they're actually just great cards to just have. You will get there. They will search their library. Sometimes against temple strategies, heck, even against energy, they won't even fetch ever because they're playing around your archive traps. Again, Eldrazi is going to be a deck that, generally speaking, will look to search their library with something like Sowing Micro Spawn to advance their game plan. Next up is going to be Dimir Murktide. And this deck list, as I mentioned, this deck is a really terrible matchup for us as modern mill players for so many reasons. So Murktide Regent, if you hyper mill them, if you play Crab on one, they'll probably let that go, right? If they're smart, they'll let that go, because what that does is you feed into their Murktide Regent. They then play the Murktide Regent and exile all the relevant cards in their graveyard, right? They don't even need to exile the instant and sorceries. They will probably just exile the cards that they believe you will surgical later down the line if you don't have it. They will then essentially remove all the cards in their graveyard on turn 2 that you needed to then drown in the lock their Murktide Regent. So already you're behind. But of course, if you have the Crab to then further enable it from there, you can kill it. But then they might have the Force of Negation. If you go back to their turn, they might have the Counterspell. All in all, it's a real goddamn problem. It is such a problem. Now these decks are playing Kaido. It's like you're playing straight Legacy. By the way, this is almost a 1-for-1 Legacy port. You just play Forces, Days, Brainstorms. Like you make the package a bit more consistent, but then like the threat package is almost like Orcish Bowmasters, Kaido, Psychic Frog, Murktide. Like the threat package is almost the same. It's almost the same. It's crazy how 1-for-1 this deck is in terms of Legacy. But the deck has a lot of interaction. Spell Snare hits your Drowns. It hits your Glimpse the Unthinkables. It hits so much that this deck needs to be able to stop. Sometimes sideboard answers. Sometimes like Doom Blades that you have out of the sideboard, it's able to answer as well. This deck's just really good. And so when it comes to answering it, Ensnaring Bridge is your lights out card. So if you look at this deck list, right? If you look at this deck list, even Kaido, right? Kaido doesn't answer this Ensnaring Bridge. Kaido is just a card that draws you cards, but it only draws cards for an opponent that lost life this turn. So if you lost life, if the Kaido's out, try not to fetch on their turn until it's at their end step. Do not be fetching main unless you have to. Kaido is then enabled. But if you look at their interaction, so Sink into Stupor, Sauron's Ransom. Look at the top 4 cards you allowed me to separate them. Okay, whatever. Ring tempts you. Thoughtseize, Preordain. So Sink into Stupor. Dreams of Steel and Oil is a wild thing, but I guess. Sink into Stupor, Engineered Explosives, maybe, and Otawara. So really, it's 2 cards. 2 cards in the deck solve a resolved Ensnaring Bridge. What happens post board is a lot of times we would bring in like Spell Pierces to be able to play the counter war, because once you resolve the Ensnaring Bridge, you force the Force and they tap out on turn 3 on the play. You play out the Ensnaring Bridge, force them to have the Force of Negation, or if they tap out on turn 3, or if they have like a 1 mana piece of interaction, you play the Ensnaring Bridge, you Spell Pierce on 4. If this Ensnaring Bridge resolves, this is the lights out card. It is the sole reason why Ensnaring Bridge is still good in the deck. It is the only matchup we're bringing this in for. Every other matchup either does nothing or your opponent has a really efficient way to answer it, so it's not even worth it. Ensnaring Bridge does a lot in this matchup when it comes to resolving it. Now, the last card, the last deck that I want to mention and talk about is Boros Combo. Ruby Storm. Boros Combo. All right, Goldfish. We're talking Ruby Storm. Now, when it comes to Ruby Storm, as I mentioned, the deck can win on turn 2. It's not that consistent, but what that means is because everything is red, it doesn't have to worry about its mana too much. It can just cast. The problem with this matchup is that it has a lot of good side plans, right? Like especially post board, it'll bring in stuff like the Phage for it to like kind of board into. It'll bring in like removal spells for if you're bringing like permanents, like Grafdigger's Cage. It'll silence. Like it has a lot of good options. And the problem is the enablers are really hard to answer because it's not just Ral Monsoon Mage. It's not just about fatal pushing Ral. Sometimes they will just play Ruby Medallion and you have nothing. This is the type of matchup where something like Consign of Memory is actually really good because you can consign the Ruby, you can consign the Storm Trigger, but then if you're grinding out and you don't have the mill spells, which is why I kind of like something like Tybalt's Mill List where you just sideboard in more, Of course, he's not playing Consign, but you play still your critical mass of mill spells, and you're still able to get there because then they can sideboard into something like Flage. They have Empty the Warrens in the sideboard. They have a Pass in Flames in the sideboard. Like, they have a lot of resiliency to your surgical extractions and your extirpate. So of course, being a combo deck, your primary thought is going to be surgical, and this card is in the main board. It's one of the reasons why Modern Mill is so good in the modern metagame, because it has that natural main board answer against the combo decks, against the graveyard strategies, and against just really like value-based quality decks. So quality versus quantity decks that have a critical mass of things such as energy. You can't really get a lot of value out of surgical something, although there is value in surgicaling some of the cards, but generally against the combo decks, against sometimes the mid-range decks as well. If you're able to surgical out a key card, having this in the main board is great. But also out of the sideboard, you get access to Extirpate. And Extirpate, the reason you play it out of the sideboard is because it's meant to be something alongside surgical extraction, because it has the split second, but the key to surgical is that it costs 0. Right? It's 0 mana, and there's a wild difference. It is double the cost. It is actually almost infinitely more the cost of something like surgical. Being free and costing 1 is a wild difference. But Extirpate is really great in response to interaction. So if your opponent's trying to bait you in a situation where they know you're going to surgical, something like Extirpate really throws off a lot of people. So Extirpate's going to be great for a situation like this, just to be able to grab something out. The key is, though, you have to remember the difference is, especially this happens in paper, but surgical extraction actually allows you to keep the card that you target in your opponent's graveyard. That can matter for the count of something like Visions of Beyond, but Extirpate actually forces you to exile all copies of the card that you target in that player's graveyard. And then at that point, you can choose to exile cards like surgical from their deck, from their hand, whatever. But you are forced to with Extirpate versus may on surgical. There are small situations where that happens, but I'm that mill guy. I gotta give you that kind of look into some of the sideboard answers that we have. But largely, that is going to be my quick recap on Modern Mill. Modern Mill is in a really tough place right now in terms of the top of the metagame, but people are still 5-0ing. They're still top 16 challenges, top 32 challenges. They're still winning challenges with modern Dimir Mill. And that should go to speak to not only pilot skill, but the power of the deck and its ability to answer different matchups that happen in the modern metagame. Although right now it might be a little tough with something like Prowess if it's just energy, but Prowess adding to like the aggressiveness of it. When Burn's really good, the deck struggles as well. But generally speaking, the deck can struggle, but Pilot's skill can really get you there. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Let me know if you've been playing Modern Mill. Let me know if you've been playing against Modern Mill and you feel like you have a really good handle on that matchup, or you've been struggling. How have you been feeling about Mill in the modern meta?